The respected Professor Umman, I think in his presence, there's no need for anybody else to talk about Kerala's economy or the role of the public sector in Kerala and how the public sector has been contributing or otherwise to the economic and social development of Kerala. So, sir, I am looking forward to listening to you. I read what you write, but I'm sure in this context of the contribution of public sector or the role of the public sector and the role of the audit in the functioning of public sector, I would very greatly look forward to your views. And I have my friend James, who, and he and I worked together. Of course, he was the executive and I was only an ornamental chairman of the Kerala State Industrial Development Corporation for a few years. And other distinguished persons on the dais, Principal Accountant General Madam Sudharmini, Mr. Dr. Fabi Varghese, Srimati Annacharian, Srimati Sri P.K. Lalu. I'm sorry, I don't have the other names. You forgive me because I do not know all of you. And although I'm not as old as Professor Umman, I am also sufficiently old and my memory is fading. So therefore I can't remember names and, connect it with the faces of people sometimes. So I don't take the name of all of you to say how happy I am to be in your midst on this day, which, as we were told in the welcome address, is an occasion which the audit profession has of late been observing very annually. Well, I have no intention of talking in detail about the audit function per se in the public sector undertakings, because first of all, I do not know much about it. And secondly, I believe that for an audience like this, more than the nitty-gritty of the working of the audit department or the audit function, it might be more appropriate to know a little bit about the background against which all these public sector undertakings have come into being. And I'm not sort of encroaching upon the domain of Professor Umman, but let us all remember that the time when the public sector concept itself was evolved or was put into practice in the country, the economy was totally different. You see, we lived in an economy where, as they say, we used to live from the pot to the kitchen. We depended more on PL 480, import of wheat from the United States for our survival. And there are many, many other areas where we were far, far obviously behind what we are today. And most of us today, therefore, have a tendency to forget what India was all about at the time when India got independence in the year 1947. Well, unfortunately, I think that's something which is unpardonable, because those of us who live today and enjoy or even suffer, put it that way also, whatever we have or whatever we don't have, all these things have evolved, not in the last 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. These things have come about, have developed over a period of 70, 75 years. Let's remember that. Today, we are exporting food grains. We have a surplus of sugar. We are exporting milk and milk products. So there are so many areas in which we have become totally self-sufficient or self-reliant. But this self-reliance has been brought about by a number of factors which were brought into play by people in positions of authority at different points of time. needless to say, the Prime Ministers of India and the cabinets in the case of the Union, and the state chief ministers and the state governments, all of them, whether they lasted 1 year or 2 years or 10 years, all of them, they were all elected people, and all of them have had in their heart of hearts the good of the people, the welfare of the people. No government would ever work against the welfare or the development of the welfare of the people or the development of the state. Of course, political parties in their eagerness to, to say that one party is better than the other, or for the sake of votes, they may, denigrate each other. But all of us realize, and we should realize, it's a democracy, it's a democratic system of government, and we are governed by the people whom we entrust with that task. So there is a lot of difference between governance under a democratic system of governance, of democracy, a democratic system, and a system which is not so. Here, all functionaries of government, including the chief executive at the center and the state, they are all accountable to people. We are accountable, not to the people directly, but these people who come every 5 years or 10 years or perhaps more frequently, they are directly accountable to the people. They are the ones who have to face the music, not us. That is not the scheme of things under which we function. We have a constitution which is supreme. There is, we are a quasi-federal republic. We are not a totally federal state, federal country like the United States or Canada. We are a quasi-federal state with, a strong central government. That's the scheme of things under which we work. We have got the 3 pillars of governance: the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, and the Constitution envisages harmonious working of these institutions of government, though they are independent of each other in terms of the constitutional provisions. Nobody is supreme all over. Everyone, every institution is supreme in its area as envisaged under the Constitution. So, successive elected governments in this country, particularly in the formative years of our independence, very, very, very thoughtfully, of course, necessity was very much there, envisaged a role for the state to play in activities which in developed countries are performed by other institutions. So we call the public sector the private sector, and for a long time, even today, we have an argument occasionally, what is the relevance of the public sector? And the public sector has been, they have been, a burden on the state. They are loss-making, they are this, they are that. But, my dear friends, I would like to remind you once again, I'm sure most of you are aware of it, that the state was given a very specific role to play in the socio-economic development of the country. And that continued over a period of time. You remember the 5-year plans, the first, the second, the third, and the fourth. These 5-year plans were instruments, policy instruments of the governments of those days to implement the socio-economic policies of the state. So, public sector undertakings, like other institutions, more than any other institution of government, was at one point of time thought to be instruments for implementing the socio-economic policies of government. We normally believe, that's the normal understanding also, that these activities which are in the domain of the public sector undertakings, they are more of a commercial nature. Well, we all think so. Generally, that is perhaps correct also. But, according to my understanding, many activities which are not strictly economic in that sense only, which are not strictly amenable to the practices or the laws of commerce and trade, they have been implemented by the governments, the state governments as well as the government of India, through many of its undertakings. So some of us may not remember that when India became independent, I mean, as I mentioned to you about the food, about other basic, what you call the basic things which are required for developing an economy, like iron and steel, power. These were not industries which came up through private initiative. First of all, private initiative was limited. There was nothing called a big stock exchange, and the capability of the private sector to garner large amounts of investment for long-term investment in these basic industries was lacking. So in the beginning, during the Nehruvian years of economic development, for developing the basic industries, very great stress was laid, and consequently you have had all those large companies, the the Durgapur steel plant, the Bhilai steel plant, and power projects, all these things came into being. Subsequently, many other activities which were considered necessary by the governments of the day, many of them were brought under the fold of the public sector companies. I have some, not intimate knowledge, some knowledge of some of these central public sector undertakings, and of course, Kerala we know, you know more than I do. Kerala also do have undertakings which are not strictly amenable to the laws of trade and commerce. Well, you have a look at the nomenclature of the public sector undertakings in Kerala, with which we are more familiar. You see a large number of activities which perhaps could have been done by private initiative. They have been taken by the government for the simple reason, I believe, that under the aegis of the government, those institutions could perhaps, more effectively function for achieving the socio-economic objectives. So my friends in the audit, field, and others who look at public sector undertakings, I have one very, very, very humble request, that look at the objectives for which that corporation was set up, and to what extent those objectives are being served through its functioning. Well, to my mind, of course, profit and loss is very important. You cannot afford to have a company which is losing heavily and eroding its capital over a period of time. No, I'm not meaning that. But my point is that making profit in the normal sense of the term, which is defined in a balance sheet or whatever, to my mind, that is not the sole objective for which these institutions were set up by the state governments. You look at the institutions of the state and read their objectives. Those objectives will spell out what they are expected to do. And the activities which they undertake have got to be in consonance with the with the socio-economic objectives. Take an activity like tourism. Take an activity like, developing the infrastructure for more industries to come up. Take into account an institution which has been, or which was set up for promoting industry or promoting some other particular activity in which the state was interested. Because the state believed that by promoting tourism, we are contributing to the socio-economic development of the state. So my basic point is that whether you are an auditor, whether you are an economist, or whatever may be the speciality or the special interest of yours, I think those of us who look at the functioning of public sector undertakings and try to evaluate their functioning must clearly understand what is the socio-economic objective for which these institutions are set up. Now, having said that, let me hasten to add that when you look at that, the most important, parameter is the governance part of that public sector undertaking. Whether it is a civil supplies corporation or a road transport corporation or an electricity board, the governance of those institutions is extremely important for achieving the socio-economic objectives. And if it's not the structure, it's the way in which, the people in the organization work. And there, unless we have clarity, unless we are really committed, I am using that word deliberately, committed, not just as a job to be done and then forgotten, as a commitment. Unless we absorb that, I think that institution would lack, what you call the soul of it. Let me put it that way. And most regrettably, unfortunately, it's not only in Kerala. I had the opportunity of serving another state government also. Many times, for a number of reasons, the governance of these public sector institutions suffer. And the most visible part of it is the very short tenures of the chief executives. And the way in which, first of all, the way in which they are selected, and even if, selection is not according to professional norms, once you put a man in charge of it, you have to give him some time to perform. But if you transfer them, at will, right, left and center, without giving them any opportunity to think of something, to organize and to wait for results, if they are shuffled around, I think that is the undoing of the public sector. So to my mind, when an auditor or whoever is called to look at the performance of public sector, I think with reference to the structure of the organization, the chief executive, whatever is the name that you give, his tenure of office and the autonomy that you give to him to function, that is extremely important. So I would like to emphasize only these two aspects. One is about the socio-economic objectives which inform, this public sector, and therefore the difference between a company run by it may not be an exact example because the Tatas and the Birlas and the others, they also have now, their social responsibility, commitment, etc., etc. But basically, there was a time when we all believed that a company has got to make profit, nothing more than that. And with that profit, the government takes by way of tax a part of it, and the socio-economic objectives are met through that. And the company has to concentrate only on making profit. But that concept is no longer valid. Companies are very actively promoting developmental activities, and under the law, they are also now required to, to set apart a certain part of a certain portion of their profit for, for these what you call social responsibility activities. Well, friends, I made these 2 points in the hope that that sometime or the other you would be able to, to think about it. Even if you don't think about it, if you have at the back of your mind, these ideas, perhaps, to my mind, the performance of your audit function as audit officers, either as individuals or as a team, to my mind, would be in total consonance with the objectives for which these institutions, the accounts of which you are going to audit. Friends, I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. I was telling Professor Uman that I do not know, I am not used to, and I just cannot, sit down and write a speech and read it out. I am unable to do that. I thought about doing it several times because I, like many others, have a tendency to go astray. You start with something, we end with something else. But I think that is, those who choose to hear me will have to. You have no choice, I know that, because somebody else decided that I should speak to you. But anyway, forget about that. I'm very happy to be in your midst. Such bright people performing such an important function, which I think would go a long way in ensuring that the objectives for which successive governments, elected governments of the country, of the state, have created these organizations. Well, in the case of Kerala, successive governments of Kerala who have promoted these different corporations. About, I have different opinions about various things, but I'm not going to go into that. You may agree, you may not agree, there may be overlapping, all kinds of things are there. But fundamentally, I think when you do the audit point of view, instead of saying that, this was not according to this or that, we do that, that's a part of it. But, that's only the small part of it. The bigger part of it is to bring out whether according to the assessment in terms of your audit, this corporation has performed the role which has been assigned to it, what it can do over a period of 1 year. If that, to my mind, function is performed, that will be in the interest of, the corporation, the state, and to my mind, you would be performing an extremely important social objective, a social function, also more than a purely government accounting function. Thank you very much.